The Warhammer 40 universe is a labyrinth of profound, inescapable paranoia. Primarchs betray their creator. Inquisitors execute their own agents. In a galaxy where the human mind is constantly targeted by demonic corruption and political treachery, absolute trust is a fatal disease. But what if the ultimate, incorruptible shield against the darkness is not forged from holy faith or tactical genius? What if the purest, most unshakable soul in the grimdark cosmos belongs to a 9-foot-tall biological battering ram with the cognitive capacity of a golden retriever? Today, on HaqqRift, we dissect the tragic, violent comedy of Nork Deddog. We will explore the anatomy of absolute, unthinking loyalty and prove why the only creature entirely immune to the sophisticated corruption of the universe is simply too stupid to understand it. To comprehend the absurd, heartbreaking existence of Nork Deddog, we must first analyze the suffocating architecture of Imperial trust. The Adeptus Terra operates on the absolute certainty that every human mind is a potential vector for treason. The higher an officer ascends in the hierarchy of the Astra Militarum, the thicker the daggers in his back become. Generals are quietly poisoned by ambitious rivals. Commissars are accidentally shot by their own terrified troops during the chaos of artillery barrages. In this environment of perpetual grinding paranoia, an Imperial commander cannot safely rely on the loyalty of intelligent men, because intelligent men possess the mental capacity to calculate a better deal with the enemy. Therefore, the Imperium requires a biological workaround. Enter the Ogryn. These massive, heavily mutated abhumans are the evolutionary byproduct of harsh, high-gravity death worlds. They possess musculature dense enough to wrestle an orc knob to a standstill, and a skeletal structure that can casually absorb the kinetic impact of a heavy bolter round. But the true, horrifying value of the Ogryn to the Departmentum Unitorum is not their apocalyptic physical strength, it is their profound, near-total intellectual degradation. They are walking, heavily armed toddlers trapped in the bodies of mythological titans, experiencing a complex, grimdark galaxy through the innocent, uncomprehending eyes of a child. The Imperial propaganda machine attempts to paint the deployment of Ogryns as a glorious integration of abhumans into the Emperor's divine light. The cold, analytical truth is that they are utilized entirely as sentient, disposable sandbags. The Commissariat exploits their childlike innocence with a level of sociopathic precision that borders on the grotesque. They do not teach the Ogryn grand tactical doctrines, geopolitical strategy, or the complex theology of the ecclesiarchy. They simply point at the terrifying, sanity-shattering horrors of the battlefield and tell the giant, "Those bad men want to hurt the Emperor," and the giant, fundamentally incapable of perceiving the lie, happily charges into the apocalyptic meat grinder simply to protect his friends. At the absolute, undisputed pinnacle of this tragic exploitation stands Nork Deddog. In the strictly measured, deeply depressing bell curve of Ogryn intelligence, Nork is considered a profound, unparalleled genius. Why? Because he can successfully write the first initial of his own name without breaking the pen. He can speak in complete, albeit rudimentary sentences, and he occasionally remembers to follow a tactical order, instead of wandering off to chase a shiny piece of shrapnel. By the standards of his species, he is a philosopher king. By the standards of the Imperium, he is the ultimate, programmable meat shield, officially assigned to protect the highest-ranking, most cowardly officers from the violent consequences of their own disastrous leadership. The deep, cosmic comedy of Nork Deddog is entirely derived from his absolute, unflinching misinterpretation of the galaxy's horrors. When a terrifying Chaos Space Marine charges the command trench, bellowing the dark, sanity-shattering praises of the ruinous powers, the Imperial officers freeze in existential dread. Nork does not see an ancient, immortal champion of the dark gods. He sees a very loud, very rude man wearing spiky armor who is trying to hurt his boss. He does not experience theological dread. He experiences the simple, primal annoyance of a guard dog defending its master's yard. He meets the apocalyptic threat not with a holy prayer, but with a profoundly violent, genetically enhanced headbutt that instantly caves in the traitor's chest cavity, entirely unaware that he just assassinated a demigod. This is the devastating philosophical irony of his existence. The Holy Inquisition spends millennia hunting for the perfect, incorruptible servant of the Golden Throne. They subject aspirants to agonizing psychic trials and physical torture, desperately searching for a human mind that cannot be tempted by the whispers of the warp. Yet, the purest, most unshakable loyalty in the entire galaxy resides inside a creature that physically cannot comprehend the concept of betrayal. Nork Deddog cannot be tempted by Tsench with promises of infinite knowledge, because Nork considers counting to 4 to be an exhausting intellectual burden. The darkest powers of the cosmos are completely neutralized by a mind so brilliantly, flawlessly empty that there is simply no room for them to enter. To truly appreciate the devastating comedic power of Nork Deddog, we must examine the historical battle records, specifically the incidents that caused the rigid, logic-driven scribes of the Administratum to suffer severe stress-induced migraines. In the standard doctrines of the Astra Militarum, heroism is defined by complex tactical sacrifices. A squad holds a choke point against impossible odds, or a commander calls an orbital bombardment upon his own position to halt a tyrannid advance. It is a structured, calculated martyrdom, but Nork's heroism completely bypasses the tactical cogitators of the Imperium. His legendary feats are not born of strategic genius, they are born of a catastrophic misunderstanding of physics and an overwhelming, childlike panic that his favorite officer might get hurt. Consider the legendary, highly documented incident involving a heavily armored Chimera transport vehicle. During a catastrophic planetary assault, the Imperial command lines were violently shattered by enemy artillery. The commanding officer, severely wounded and pinned down in a trench under a relentless storm of heavy bolter fire, activated his Vox speed and screamed a desperate final order to his Ogryn bodyguard. "Get me out of here! Get me to the Medicae!" For a normal, intelligent human soldier, this order would imply calling for a Valkyrie extraction, throwing smoke grenades and attempting a tactical covering retreat. It requires complex situational awareness, but Nork Deddog does not possess situational awareness. He possesses the literal, unyielding interpretation of a toddler. He looked at his bleeding commander, processed the command, "Get me out of here," and immediately formulated the most direct, brutally simple solution imaginable. Nork did not look for a medic. He did not attempt to lay down suppressing fire. He simply walked over to a heavily damaged, 30-ton Chimera armored transport that had been immobilized in the mud, grabbed the towing cables with his bare, massive hands, and decided that he was going to become the engine. What followed was a spectacle of absolute, physics-defying absurdity that permanently traumatized everyone who witnessed it. While enemy artillery shells detonated all around them, turning the battlefield into a literal hellscape of fire and shrapnel, this 9-foot-tall biological anomaly casually dragged a 30-ton metal bunker across miles of shattered terrain. He did not march with the grim determination of a tragic hero. He trudged forward with the single-minded, stubborn focus of a child dragging a heavy toy box across a living room floor. The enemy forces ceased firing, not out of mercy, but out of sheer paralyzing confusion. You cannot mathematically calculate a firing solution for a scenario that actively insults the laws of mass and kinetic friction. When Nork finally arrived at the rear echelon Medicae camp, dragging the groaning, sparking wreck of the Chimera behind him, the attending tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus experienced a collective, localized logic loop. They frantically analyzed the vehicle, trying to comprehend what kind of apocalyptic, anti-gravitic technology could have moved such a mass through a war zone. They completely ignored the giant, sweaty Ogryn sitting quietly in the corner, heavily panting, waiting patiently for someone to tell him he was a good boy and perhaps offer him an extra ration of nutritional paste. He had successfully rewritten the logistical capabilities of the Imperial Guard, simply because he did not realize that dragging a tank was supposed to be impossible. This is the brilliant, dark comedy of his existence. The Imperium spends trillions of credits developing complex recovery vehicles and specialized retrieval teams, entirely unaware that the most effective towing mechanism in the sector is simply a giant who really wants to please his boss. But beneath the comedy lies that familiar, suffocating, grimdark tragedy. Nork performed a miracle, but he will never understand the magnitude of his own legend. He doesn't want medals, he doesn't want a glorious statue on Holy Terror, and he doesn't understand the geopolitical impact of his survival. He just wants his commander to stop bleeding, so they can go back to playing a game of catch with a deactivated frag grenade. To elevate this cosmic joke to its highest frequency, we must direct our focus toward the enemies of mankind. The Warhammer 40 galaxy is populated by entities of profound, terrifying arrogance. Ancient Eldari farseers who can read the threads of fate. Chaos sorcerers who have spent thousands of years mastering the dark, reality-bending arts of the Imperium. Tyrannid hive tyrants, engineered by a superconsciousness to be the ultimate apex predators. When these elite, godlike beings step onto the battlefield to assassinate an Imperial general, they expect to engage in a sophisticated, highly dramatic duel of wits and martial prowess. They expect the humans to scream, to strategize, and to break. Instead, they are intercepted by Nork Deddog. And this is where the grand Gothic opera of the grimdark universe abruptly crashes into the brick wall of lowbrow comedy. Imagine a Chaos Lord of Slaanesh, moving with impossible, fluid grace, his daemon blade humming with the trapped souls of 1,000 victims. He elegantly deflects the desperate last fire of the command squad, preparing to deliver a highly poetic monologue before decapitating the terrified general. He leaps through the air, perfectly calculating the trajectory of his strike. And then, his grand 10,000-year destiny is abruptly cancelled by a giant, sweaty hand the size of a dinner plate that simply grabs him out of the air like an annoying mosquito. Nork does not engage in a duel. He does not parry, feint, or study his opponent's stance. He operates entirely on the binary logic of a bouncer at a very exclusive, very violent nightclub. If you try to touch the boss, you get the smack. When the Chaos Lord attempts to use his dark magic to boil the Ogryn's blood, nothing happens, because Nork's biology is so densely packed and fundamentally crude that the intricate warp spells simply fail to find purchase. Frustrated, Nork merely swings his massive Ripper gun like a baseball bat, launching the ancient immortal champion of the dark gods over the horizon with a dull, highly undignified thud. The ruinous powers are not defeated by the holy light of the Emperor. They are defeated by a creature treating them like an irritating pest. The psychological damage inflicted upon the surviving enemy forces is catastrophic. Even the Orcs, a species literally engineered for blunt force trauma and chaotic violence, find themselves deeply offended by Nork's presence. The Greenskins fight for the sheer, ecstatic joy of the battle. They want a loud, chaotic brawl. But when an Orc warboss charges at Nork, he is met not with a rival seeking glory, but with an annoyed giant who treats the fight like a tedious household chore. Nork systematically dismantles the Orc command structure with a bored, vacant expression, occasionally looking back at his commander for approval. It ruins the Orc's entire mood. It is profoundly humiliating to be beaten to death by someone who clearly isn't even enjoying it. This dynamic violently exposes the ultimate fragility of the galaxy's most terrifying villains. They have spent millennia building complex narratives of fear, designing spiky armor, and perfecting their terrifying war cries. They believe their own hype. But all of that majestic, ancient villainy is entirely dependent on the victim actually understanding how scary they are supposed to be. Nork Deddog strips away their gothic mystique and reduces them to their most basic physical components. To Nork, a terrifying genestealer patriarch is just a very ugly, multi-armed dog that needs to be hit with a rolled-up newspaper. He forcefully deromanticizes the apocalypse. The generals of the Astra Militarum watch this unfold from the safety of their bunkers, sipping fine amasec and pretending that they masterminded the entire engagement. They take the credit for the flawless defense, accepting the commendations of the High Lords. Meanwhile, The true architect of the victory is sitting outside in the mud, happily chewing on a piece of plasteel plating, entirely oblivious to the fact that he just single-handedly preserved the tactical stability of an entire sector. The elite monsters of the galaxy are weeping in the shadows, their egos permanently shattered, outplayed not by a strategic mastermind, but by a profoundly innocent giant who was just following instructions. To fully appreciate the comedic disruption Nork Deddog brings to the Astra Militarum, one must look at the highly educated, deeply arrogant men he is assigned to protect. An Imperial Lord General is a product of the Schola Progenium, trained for decades in the complex Machiavellian arts of galactic warfare. He surrounds himself with brilliant tactical advisors, sanctioned psychers and hardened veteran officers. Yet, beneath the gold braid and the medals, the general is sweating in absolute terror, perfectly aware that every single brilliant man in his command tent possesses the cognitive capacity to successfully orchestrate his assassination. Ambition is the currency of the Imperial High Command, and intellect is merely the blade used to collect it. So, the general makes a profoundly absurd geopolitical decision. He dismisses his highly educated lieutenants, locks the door to his sanctum, and chooses to place his absolute trust in a 9-foot-tall biological anomaly who is currently trying to eat his own communication bead. The visual contrast is a masterpiece of dark comedy. You have the ultimate architect of a planetary invasion, a man who commands millions of lives with a flick of his pen, frantically trying to explain complex tactical positioning to a giant who only understands the concepts of stay here, smash that, and lunchtime. The general's colossal intellectual ego is completely dismantled by his desperate need for a bodyguard who physically cannot spell the word treason. This creates a deeply hilarious, highly unorthodox psychological dynamic on the battlefield. A standard commissar commands through the absolute projection of terror, executing cowards to maintain discipline. But you cannot use psychological terror on Nork Deddog, because Nork does not understand the concept of a firing squad. If a commissar pulls a bolt pistol on him, Nork will likely assume it's a shiny new toy and ask to hold it. Therefore, the hardened, sociopathic officers of the Imperium are forced to adopt the humiliating management style of an exhausted kindergarten teacher. They issue orders using simplified vocabulary, exaggerated hand gestures, and the promise of shiny medals that Nork treats like collectible stickers. Consider the tactical translation required to operate this biological weapon. The general surveys the hololithic map and deduces a brilliant, multi-stage strategy. We must execute a flanking maneuver, bypass their overlapping fields of fire, and neutralize the command bunker to shatter their localized morale. He then turns to Nork and says, "Nork, see that ugly building? Go hit it until it stops making noise." The entire 10,000-year pedigree of Imperial military doctrine is violently condensed into a sentence fit for a toddler, simply because it is the only frequency the sector's most lethal combat asset can actually receive. Yet there is a profound therapeutic comfort for the commander hiding behind this giant. In a galaxy actively listening to your every thought, Nork is a living, breathing, unhackable vault. A general can stand next to Nork and vent his darkest, most heretical frustrations. He can loudly curse the High Lords of Terror, insult the Inquisition, and question the divinity of the Emperor himself. Nork will simply stand there, happily chewing on a ration bar, completely oblivious to the fact that he just witnessed a capital offense. To the paranoid officers of the Grimdark, Nork is not just a bodyguard. He is the galaxy's only safe emotional support animal, heavily armed with a Ripper gun. But this reliance comes with a suffocating, humbling realization. The general went to the finest academies, studied the ancient texts of Lord Solar Macarius, and clawed his way to the top of the military hierarchy, only to realize that his continued existence entirely depends on making sure his giant friend doesn't get distracted by a butterfly during an artillery barrage. The ultimate, highly decorated master of strategy is reduced to a glorified babysitter, acutely aware that the moment he loses Nork's incredibly short attention span, the apocalypse will finally catch up to him. We laugh at the absurdity of the heavily armed toddler, But when we strip away the dark comedy, we unearth the most devastating, heartbreaking tragedy in the entire Warhammer 40 universe. Zoom out from the muddy trenches of the battlefield and look at the cosmic scale of the 41st millennium. The galaxy is burning. Ancient gods are dying in the void. Billions of souls are fed daily into the grinding, unfeeling machinery of the Imperium just to keep the lights on. It is an ecosystem of pure, unapologetic cruelty that actively corrupts everything it touches. And trapped directly in the center of this cosmic nightmare is Nork Deddog. Nork does not understand the grimdark. He has no conceptual framework for the Imperium of man. He does not fight for 1,000,000 worlds, and he does not worship a corpse emperor he has never seen. His entire universe is exceptionally small, usually localized to a 10-foot radius around whoever was nice to him that morning. He fights with apocalyptic fury, not because he hates the alien or the heretic, but simply because the man who gave him a shiny button told him that the bad men were coming. His motivation is so impossibly pure, so entirely divorced from the geopolitical horrors of the galaxy, that it physically hurts to observe it. The true tragedy manifests when the inevitable occurs. When Nork is wounded, when an enemy sniper manages to pierce his incredibly thick hide, or a plasma blast burns his massive shoulder, a space marine would roar in righteous fury, reciting litanies of hatred. A standard guardsman would scream in the agonizing existential terror of a meaningless death. But Nork cries. He whimpers with the profound, genuine confusion of a child who accidentally scraped his knee on the playground. He looks down at his bleeding wounds, fundamentally incapable of understanding why the universe is being so mean to him when he was just trying to be a good boy. This reaction shatters the psychological armor of anyone who witnesses it. Hardened Imperial veterans, men who have watched entire cities burn without shedding a single tear, will desperately throw themselves into the line of fire to protect the crying giant. Because looking at a wounded Nork forces them to confront the absolute, unforgivable ugliness of their own civilization. The Imperium took a creature of pure, unadulterated innocence, strapped armor to its chest, handed it a gun, and threw it into hell. Nork is the ultimate victim of the grimdark, a being fundamentally too pure to exist in the 41st millennium, violently exploited by men who are far too corrupted to deserve him. We all know exactly how the saga of Nork Deddog must eventually end. He will not die in a glorious epic duel that bards will sing about for millennia. He will not fall defending a holy relic or holding a strategic choke point. One day, Nork will simply see a live grenade land at the feet of his commander, and without a single microsecond of hesitation, without any grand philosophical thought or desire for martyrdom, he will throw his massive, beautiful body on top of it. He will die violently, terribly, and unceremoniously simply because he did not want his boss to get a boo-boo. Nork Deddog is the grimdark universe's greatest apology. In a galaxy that systematically punishes compassion, rewards paranoia, and demands cold, calculated cruelty, Nork stands as a towering, illiterate monument to unconditional love. He is a glitch in the matrix of despair. He proves that even in the darkest, most hellish timeline imaginable, the simplest, most fundamental form of human loyalty cannot be entirely erased. He is the best of humanity, trapped in the body of a monster, dying over and over again for a galaxy that will never ever understand his worth. Out somewhere on a battlefield that will never make it into the golden archives of terror, a 9-foot giant is sitting in the mud. He is not thinking about the war. He is not contemplating the geopolitical implications of the sector he just single-handedly preserved. He is waiting. He is waiting for his commander to tell him he did a good job. The administratum will file a report. The Lord General will accept a commendation. The scribes will document a flawless tactical victory, attributing it to superior imperial strategy and the unyielding will of the God Emperor. Nork's name will not appear in the report, it never does. He doesn't mind. His commander is still breathing. That was the mission. That was always the only mission. In a galaxy that has forgotten what loyalty looks like without a price tag, Nork Deddog remembers. He just can't spell it.